The book of Ruth. One of my favorite books simply because my grandmother is named after it. Ruth Stratton Creed. Never knew her. But from what my mother said, she was a princess among ladies. She had to have been to put up with my grandfather. But Ruth, we're going to be reading in chapter 4, verses 7 through 18. Let us hear the word of the Lord. Now this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging, to confirm a transaction, that one drew off his sandal and gave it to the other, and this was the manner of attesting in Israel. So when the Redeemer said to Boaz, "Buy it for yourself," he drew off his sandal. Then Boaz said to the elders and all the people, "You are witnesses this day that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech, and to all that belonged to Chilon and Mahlon. Also Ruth the Moabite, the widow of Mahlon, I have bought to be my wife, to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brothers, and from the gaze of his private place. You are witnesses this day." Then all the people who were at the gate and the elders said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Leah and Rachel, who together built up the house of Israel. May you act worthy in Ephratah and be renowned in Bethlehem. And may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring that the Lord will give you by this young woman." So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife, and he went into her. And the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. Then the women said to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him." Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap and became his nurse. And the women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, "A son has been born to Naomi." They named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. These are the generations of Perez. Perez fathered Hezron. Hezron fathered Ram. Ram fathered Amminadab. Amminadab fathered Nahshon. Nahshon fathered Salmon. Salmon fathered Boaz. And Boaz fathered Obed. Obed fathered Jesse. And Jesse fathered David. May God bless the reading of his word. This was certainly a different time in history and culture. Did you notice that one word about when Boaz took Ruth as his wife? What did it say that Boaz did? He purchased her. He purchased her. Hate to say it, but in those days in Israel and most of the world, women were essentially like slaves. They had no rights. They had no role in decision making. Their role was, as my grandpa would have said, to cook, clean, and have babies. And when a young lady would want to get married, even though she could often pick out her own husband, in most lowly circles, but she would have to go to his future father-in-law and would have to pay the bride price. If you wanted to marry a girl, you had to pay whatever her father asked in cash or cattle or whatever to be able to purchase your bride. Cliff, if you're up there, thank you for being different. I could not have afforded what you let me have. But he did tell me one time when I Jody and I was fussing a little bit, I think, at a holiday at their house or something, and I looked over to my father-in-law, Cliff, and I kidded him and said, Cliff, can I return her? And Cliff looked up at me with a big smile and said, sorry, no deposit, no returns. Redemption of land also had redemption of people. Let's review this story as we come up to the real point I want to make today. There's a time in Israel when the economy tanks. The Bible simply says a famine appeared. It's another way of putting it. They couldn't afford to live. Nothing to eat. No money. Farm wasn't doing good. So Elimelech packed up his wife, Naomi, and his two sons, Mahlon and Chilion, and they packed up and they moved to the country of Moab, which is right next door to Israel. Now, there's nothing really new or strange about that during the Depression. It's well known among the news of the constant travel of people, both in wagons as well as in cars and trucks, along that Route 66 from Kansas and Oklahoma and Texas, heading to California, where they were told there was jobs waiting for them. My dad came out to Kansas because he was an aircraft mechanic, and he heard a big company called Boeing was hiring mechanics for airplanes. That's nothing new. They get there and they set up housekeeping, and this again is nothing really new, but the boys grew of age and they wanted to get married. That's not unusual for a young man to find a girl who winks at him just right, and boy, we've just got to get married. You remember those days? By the way, you did hear about the one music director who asked people, I'm going to give out a word and you tell me what song you think of. And after a couple of words, he hollered out the word sex. And the whole church fell silent. And after a moment or two, a little old lady on the back row quietly started singing, "Precious memories, how they linger." But when you're young, thoughts in springtime to the thoughts of love. And they married. They married Ruth and Obed. They married them. But tough times hit. Elimelech dies, leaving Naomi a penniless widow. Then the two sons die, leaving the two daughter-in-laws also destitute widows. Remember, women couldn't get jobs. Well, they weren't supposed to. It was tough if you were a widow without a husband or a father or brothers or something to take care of you. So after a while, Naomi decides to do a not uncommon thing, and she told her two daughters-in-law, "Hey, we got family back in Israel. We got family back in Bethlehem. We can find somewhere to be taken care of if we go back to Bethlehem, so let's pack up and move." There's lots of widows done that, right? My own great-grandma, Rebecca Creed, came out from Missouri as a widow with 3 sons and homesteaded out here. But on the way, Naomi stops and she says, "Now listen, girls, you have no relatives back in Israel. I do. I got some relatives I can look at, some relatives I can live with, some relatives that can help me, but you have nobody to redeem you. There's no property that you can get. So you two, why don't you go back to your own homes and live with your families where you got a chance of being taken care of. You might have to marry your stupid brother-in-law, but at least you'll have a home. Well, one of them says, okay. Kisses Naomi goodbye and goes home. But Ruth says, no. I'm going to give up everything here because I see no reason to stay here. I'm going to go with you back to Israel. I'm going to live with you and accept everything you have. I'm even going to adopt your God as my God. So they head back there. Now they get back there and they got to figure out how they're going to live. And this is where the story gets interesting and where what I want to get across to us begins to come about. The passage I read is where the whole story comes together. And Naomi and her father-in-laws and her brother-in-laws and her husband's property is redeemed back into the family. She finds a family by being redeemed by a close relative, even though it means being bought. But as I read this story, I don't see this as just something that kind of falls into place. I'm seeing Ruth as a lady who's got some brains. Now, we can't always pick the best circumstances in our situations, right? But we can choose to use our minds and our ingenuity to make the best of any situation. The reality is, if Ruth is going to have any kind of family, she's going to have to be somehow bought or redeemed into Naomi's family. That's the system. Lousy system? Yes. A screwed up system? Yes. A system that stripped women of all their rights? Yes. But that's what she had to work with. So knowing that, I think she set up a plan and began to put in motion to where she would pick who bought her. Does that make sense? If I've got to be bought out, if I got to be in this situation, I might as well make the best of it and get the best one I can get. Now, I think that's pretty good thinking. She may not necessarily get to be what she really wants, the way she wants, but she can maximize her situation. Because by the time she went out to winnow in the fields to gather grain, she had already done her homework, and she knew Boaz, this landowner, was a near kinsman and could redeem her. She already knew Boaz was rich. And he was probably old. He's probably old enough to be her father because there's evidence that he may have been her father-in-law's brother. And she had done research and she'd found out that Boaz had a tremendously good reputation in town. He was known and he was respected for being kind and gentle and giving and loving and hardworking. But she also knew there was a thing in Jewish law, that even though at the time they were penniless, they could still eat because the law said the farmers had to leave the outside edges of the field unharvested for the poor people. So all the fields she could have chosen to harvest in, guess who she chose? Boaz's. One thing for sure, if you want to find a husband, ladies, you got to go where the men are, right? A lady's not going to find a good husband in a convent. You got to go where the men are, where the good men are, and she knew this was a good man, so she sets herself up where he could get to know her. He could get to recognize her situation, which is exactly what happened. And as he came to fully understand her situation, that Naomi and Ruth needed their property redeemed as per Jewish law, that she is a widow and Naomi is a widow, needed themselves to be redeemed by male relatives to care for them. She's putting herself in the position to be noticed by the one she would like. And he notices her. And after they have the discussion when she sleeps at his feet, so he knows she's cared, this has all come about, and he understands her situation. She says, you just, in the morning, you go ahead and get up, and you go back home, and don't worry because the day will not pass, and I'll have this fixed for you. Boy, that's nice. So he goes to the gates. They didn't have a courthouse at the time. The men all met at the gates of town, and they discussed the problems. So he arrives early in the morning, and he also understands that there is somebody closer relative that has first rights on redeeming the property and Ruth than he does. So he gets them and he goes up to the guy and says, now listen, these ladies need their property and their lives redeemed under law. I would redeem them, but you have got first right by law because you're a closer relative than I am. So tell me right now, are you going to redeem them or not? At first he says, yeah, I'll be happy to. I can use some more fields and lands and everything. But then Boaz comes up and says, now you know, if you get the land, you get the girl. We're not splitting up the pair. You get the land, you get the girl. So all of a sudden he backs up and says, now, woo, I'm not in a position to have another wife. Now, he might have been named Leroy, knowing that there's a darling at home that would have a fit if he brought home another girl, right? She's nodding, yeah. Whatever the reason, he said, I can't do it. So Boaz says, okay, then I will redeem them both. And so the ceremony took place where the shoe was passed along, which was an indication that like they had shook hands on the deal and witnessed by all of the senior men in the village, all of the elders. They'd all witnessed this and they all assumed, yes, you made this agreement. So then Ruth and Naomi were purchased and came under the house of Boaz. Their property was redeemed. And we're told that Ruth had a bunch of children by Boaz. A bunch of children. Now that was the idea of the levirate marriage. She had married a man. They tried to have kids. They never had kids until he died. So now all these kids are entitled to all of her and her late husband's property, even though she was married now to Boaz. That's the way the law worked. And even more so, see God at work. Who did she become the great-grandmother to? King David. You see that in the genealogies. And of course, that also put her right in the direct line of inheritance to Christ. Boaz, a woman who knows what she wants. My question for everybody today is this. What is there in life that we need or want? Now, I'm not trying to be a prosperity speaker, name it and claim it or anything like that. Nor am I trying to develop any kind of greediness. But too many people sit back and say, as Doris Day used to sing, "Que sera, sera, whatever will be, whatever will be." How many of you remember that song besides me? Okay. Nope. She has been handed a basket of bad deals, wrong circumstances. But Naomi knew what she needed, and she could see a way to bring about the best possible outcome. I don't think necessarily everything she would have wanted. I think she would have liked to have gone out and picked out one of the young men just for her. But no, she settles for the old rich man who can take care of her and who actually obviously does love her and care for her and protect her. The best outcome she could have hoped for. And she makes her plans and she puts those into action to make something happen. We can make things happen. Think about that for a minute. In our own country's suffrage movement for women's rights, how many women behind us did things that in a system that was wrong and unfair that managed to get better outcomes for everybody? Think about it for a minute. And whether we're man or woman, when we're up against these obstacles of what can we do, we can, number one, rely that Jesus is still on the throne, that Jesus is still in charge of things, and that even if our circumstances are not the best, or maybe even the worst, if we will use the brains that God gave us, trust in Jesus, we can have far better outcomes in our lives. It's what Joseph did when he was sold into slavery, and he ended up assistant Pharaoh over the whole land. That's what Daniel did when he was thrown into the lion's den. It's what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did when they were thrown into the fiery furnace. They made the best of what they had. And they came out on top. Whatever our circumstances is, we can affect change. Good change. Profitable change. Change that makes it easier for the next one to come along. And despite all of the disadvantages, guess who has got an entire book named after her in the Bible? Ruth. It's not named the book of Naomi. It's not named the book of Chilon or Boaz. It's named the book of Ruth. And she became known as an upstanding woman in the community, respected, loved, and cared for. And for what it's worth, sometimes those unfortunate circumstances can make a person far more powerful than they would have been otherwise. After all, we know how marriages are. I wonder how many, down through the history, how many kings have made decisions simply because the queen leaned over and says, I think we need to do this. And the king, being like most husbands, goes, yes, dear. And you know what? Many of the times I've said yes, dear, to my wife, it turns out, don't tell her I said this. It'll go to her head. So don't tell her I said this. But she was right. Okay? So help us be people who know what we want. Lord, help us today. Guide us, lead us into what you want us to be, what you want us to do. Make our bad situations into the best things possible. Help us to, above all, place Christ first and foremost in all that we do. And we ask it in your name. Amen. Now let us pray the prayer that the Lord taught us to pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen.